The Eiger, located in the Swiss Alps, has claimed the lives of over 64 climbers since 1935, earning the nickname Murder Wall. It has the highest north face of the Alps, with over a mile of almost vertical rock and ice. For years, Swiss guides believed the north face of the Eiger was too dangerous to climb and would refuse to attempt to save anyone quote-unquote foolish enough to try. Here are 3 incidents where climbers did in fact try, ending in tragedy. Our first incident on the Eiger occurred in early August of 1957. Italian climbers Claudio Corti, age 29, and Stefano Longhi, age 44, who were members of the climbing and mountaineering group Lecco Spiders, had begun scaling the north face through the Heckmeer route, a standard but difficult route for climbers there. Following Claudio and Stefano, there were 2 German climbers, Gunther Norduft and Franz Mayer, both age 22, who caught up with the Italians roughly a third of the way up. As they were heading up the same route, Gunther and Franz decided to join Claudio and Stefano, climbing alongside them. The same day, which was a Monday, the 4 climbers reached the base of the second ice field about the midway point up the north face. The climbers' progress on the Eiger slowed significantly, with the team only reaching the Death Bivouac by Tuesday night and the Traverse of the Gods by Thursday night. It was at this point, around 400 meters from the summit, that Stefano fell more than 30 meters down the face while roped to Claudio, leaving Stefano dangling off an overhang. Already disoriented from a rockfall hitting him in the head earlier in the ascent, Claudio's hands were severely burned by the rope in an attempt to keep Stefano from falling. As Stefano was stuck and Claudio wasn't fit to climb, the Germans decided to leave gear with them and make the summit, then descend down the other easier side of the mountain. Swiss alpinist Paul Seiler, who had been part of the 7th successful attempt of the Eiger North Face, had been watching through binoculars and decided to launch a rescue, but found that professional Swiss guides refused to participate, again going by that policy that the North Face was too dangerous. However, Paul managed to get other alpinists, Eric Friedli, Lionel Terray, and Ludwig Graminger together to form a group of over 50 men from various groups to save the climbers. Legendary climbers Riccardo Cassin and Carlo Mauri also joined the rescue. It would be an extremely dangerous mission with a storm coming, but they were determined. On the west flank, Claudio and Stefano were found still alive after 8 days on the wall, but they saw no signs of the Germans. A winch was set up, lowering Alfred Hellepart down to Claudio, who was by now extremely dehydrated and starved. With great effort, Claudio was rescued, making the first successful rescue on the North Face ever. Stefano unfortunately didn't make it through the storm passing through, and his body could only be recovered the following year in 1959. Despite rescuing Claudio, the fate of the 2 Germans remained unknown for a long time. Claudio, recovering in the hospital, faced scrutiny and blame, even being accused of deliberately pushing Franz and Gunther off the mountain. 4 years later, in 1961, the bodies of the Germans were found on the west flank, revealing that they had been caught in an avalanche after successfully summiting the North Face. Claudio was vindicated, and Gunther Norduft and Franz Mayer were posthumously credited with the 14th ascent of the Eiger North Face. Our next incident occurred during the filming of the 1975 film The Eiger Sanction in August 1974, which was directed by Clint Eastwood. Part of the climbing scenes were to be filmed on the Eiger's north face, and Clint Eastwood had insisted on doing his own stunts for the film. This was especially dangerous as The Eiger Sanction was one of the first films featuring climbing that was not filmed on a more controlled film set in a studio. Clint had hired climber and mountaineer Mike Hoover, known for his documentary Solo. Mike would teach Clint how to climb the mountain, as Clint wanted to complete his stunts by himself, which was strongly advised against by experienced mountaineer Dougal Haston. Later on, a 26-year-old Scottish climber named David Knowles was hired as a climbing double. On August 13, 1974, on the Eiger North Face, the filming crew had just finished filming a rock slide sequence by mid-afternoon and were preparing to get taken off the mountain by helicopter. At this moment, Mike Hoover remembered that they hadn't got any shots from the climber's point of view of the boulders falling down onto them. Mike took his handheld camera and decided to rappel down to a ledge with David Knowles. As the two were gathering their gear, a huge boulder loosened by the earlier quote-unquote controlled rock slides broke free and began hurtling towards them. The rock hit David directly and killed him instantly, and left Mike with a fractured pelvis and severe bruising. Production stopped for a few days as Clint Eastwood considered cancelling the production totally. The climbers persuaded him to continue, assuring him that the climbers knew the risks and didn't want David's death to be meaningless. According to mountaineer Chick Scott, who worked on the film, climbers took out $100,000 life insurance policies before resuming filming. Our last incident takes us back to July 1936, where the North Face had yet to be ascended for the first time. 10 climbers from Austria and Germany had set their sights on making their way up the Eiger's North Face after a previous unsuccessful attempt in 1935 that resulted in the deaths of 2 men on the rock face. Undeterred, in July 1936, they prepared themselves to be the first to make it all the way up. However, one of their group was killed during one of their training exercises and the weather was extremely bad. After the group waited for a change in weather that hadn't come, all but 4 of the climbers decided to give up on the mission. These 4 climbers were 2 Bavarians, Andreas Hinterstoiser and Tony Kurtz, and 2 Austrians, Willi Angerer and Eddie Rayner. This group would be the one to go ahead with the climb. They were all pretty young, Andreas being the youngest at 21 and Willi being the oldest at 30 to 31 years of age. However, they were all pretty experienced in climbing. The men made good progress on the first day of the challenge, apart from Andreas falling 37 meters down the mountain face and apparently being unharmed. Andreas had been using a technique at the time to cross steep rock faces with fixed ropes that later made the section named after him as the Hinterstoiser Traverse. The issue was that he had removed the ropes after the first traverse, which would make it much more difficult if they needed to go back. Spectators watching through binoculars on the second day noticed that something was wrong, with Willi appearing to be in bad shape and struggling to continue. The group made slow progress and reached Death Bivouac, the place where the German climbers from the previous year had passed away. Willi clearly couldn't continue, however, so the group decided to descend. By the end of the second day, the group had made their way past the second ice field, but remember that Andreas had removed those fixed ropes, so they were almost stuck on the rock face and exposed. Freezing rain rolled in, and the only way that they could get off the rock face would be to rappel down a 600-foot cliff face. Soon, rescue crews were called, but before they arrived, an avalanche suddenly swept Andreas off the mountain to his death. The other climbers were roped together, so when Tony and Willi were pushed off the cliff, they dragged Eddie with him. The rope strangled Willi, smashed Eddie's head into a rock, causing him to freeze to death, and left Tony dangling on the rope. As night fell, the guides couldn't climb the ice face to rescue Tony and promised to return in the morning despite his pleas. In the morning, they found Tony with 8-inch icicles hanging from his boots and his left hand was frozen solid. Attempts to throw him a rope failed. Then, following rescuers' instructions, Tony somehow lowered himself with one arm, cut Willi's body loose, and climbed back up 25 feet to cut the rope again. Using that section of rope, he would unwind it and create a thinner makeshift rope. Tony then lowered the makeshift rope to the guides, who attached a thicker rope and supplies. The rescue rope was still too short, however, so they tied a second rope near the bottom. After 4 nights of no sleep and exposure, Tony painstakingly hauled the rope and gear up over an hour. He began his descent but halted just feet above the guides. The knot joining the 2 ropes that had been tied by the rescuers was too large to fit through his carabiner. Despite yells of encouragement from the guides, he couldn't get the knot through the carabiner, and eventually he muttered, "I'm finished," before tipping forward and dying just out of the rescuers' reach. These stories of courage and tragedy remind us of the inherent risks faced by those who dare to conquer the murder wall. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.